For the meeting this evening for the Substance Prevention Coalition, we have presenters from the EFA group, Envisioned Equity for All. So they will be talking about some information about their group, how it was formed, and then also looking at general information as well as information from the district in terms of inequities and how those might lead to substance use and other consequences. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Happy to have you.
If anybody has questions, just put them into the chat and we'll have time at the end to ask some questions and get some more clarification if needed.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Taryn Gentile. I am a co-facilitator for EFA, which is Envisioned Equity for All. And together I have two counterparts with me today. I have Rochelle Dyer, who is a parent, a St. Cloud State Assistant Professor and Director of Social Studies Education and EFA member. And I also have Michelle Nelson, who is a parent, teacher, and EFA member. EFA, or Envisioned Equity for All, has a very strong mission statement. Through ongoing activism, EFA strives to cultivate and challenge inequities within systems while also validating, affirming, and supporting marginalized voices in our community. So again, it's not just limited to one type of equity. We're looking at everything across the board and how we can make things better for others. So who are we? We're a group of Sartell-St. Stephen community members, parents of students in the districts, and also staff. We came together earlier this past summer, and we all saw inequity within the community and the school, and started because of the murder of George Floyd and the circumstances that followed. And we found that with the school had a lack of communication after that happened, and it took them a while to get an equity statement out. So we felt very strongly that we wanted to continue to build equity within our district. After a lot of work, we've recently seen success with that equity audit, which was a recent yes, and that is currently underway with the results hopefully being released in late May or early June.
All right, so we just wanted to highlight some of the grassroots organizing that that we're seeing in our schools. There's been some book clubs within the teachers union, you know, that some teachers have elected to be a part of. That was, you know, pre-corona, we did most of that. But we've also had student groups form in the last couple years. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of those. So very recently, the Sartell Middle School organized a student group, and they're calling themselves the Sartell Middle Schoolers for Equity. On the next, don't go there yet, Jen, but on the next slide, I have a couple pictures. They've been doing some bulletin boards, and this group just, you know, this group just became a group this particular school year, and it's mostly with 8th grade students, but they've been very happy with it. The advisor, Mrs. Richardson, I talked with her a little bit for the presentation, and she's very, very proud of the work that they've done. And so they meet daily as a small group during their like study hall time. So the students are like doing this, you know, rather than working on homework. So that's really awesome. And then weekly as a large group. And they're reading the like young readers edition of Stamped by Ibram Kendi and Jason Reynolds. And then you'll see the bulletin boards. We've also had, we've seen like our GSA numbers at the high school grow. And so there's about 45 students who are a part of that group. It's a safe space for allies and members of the queer community to learn about issues that might be affecting them. It's a place where students can safely connect with each other's. It's, you know, not just for students who would, you know, say that they're in the queer community, but just allies also. And so it's kind of neat listening to them talk about their the presentations that they're also volunteering to put together. And so I asked a couple of students, and they said that some of the topics have been neopronouns, queer baiting, and asexuality. And then the Student Advocates for Equity Safe Sartell group has had, this is its second year that it's been going, and last school year was more just sort of like getting things organized. We created this mission statement last year, and this year has been more of a year of action. And so we've had some fun projects like putting together a presentation for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, working on some stuff with classroom libraries and make sure there's representation in those libraries. So that's what we've got as far as grassroots goes. So you can see the next slide. And I thought it was funny, Mrs. Richardson sent me the pictures, and that one with the giving tree, like that was at the end of our presentation. So you'll see that one again tonight. All right. Okay, so we thought it would be a good idea to start out with, what's the difference between equity and equality? Because, those words are thrown around quite a bit. And so you can see from the graphic too, that equality is that each individual or group of people is given the same resources. So like in a very practical way, I would say like anyone can take an AP class, or anyone, can sign up for a college class, right? Or anyone can participate in a sporting, like an activity. But equity is that thing that it recognizes that each person has different circumstances, and so like, then what are we doing to make sure that it's possible, for everyone to actually join a sport? Recognizing those barriers, that would be more like equity. Okay.
All right, so as we look at ACEs, we recognize as a group that you had or will be having presentations on ACEs in the past or in the future. And so we wanted to just remind you of the correlation of ACEs and some of that not great behavior that some of our students might be attracted to as they experience more ACEs in their life. And so ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And these are things like experiencing violence, abuse, and neglect, witnessing violence in the home or the community, or having a family member attempt or die by suicide. And all of those aspects undermine that sense of safety and stability and bonding that would normally be a part of the household without those disruptions that are caused. When we look at ACEs nationwide, this is a statistic from, this is the entire US as we look at the statistic. 1/2 to 2/3 of serious problems with drug use are associated with many of the different ACEs that kids experience. And so when we look at this on a closer level, we can look at in our own community within Sartell, how are students experiencing ACEs? If you'll flip to the next slide, Jennifer. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we did was go through the Minnesota student survey data that's available through the Minnesota Department of Education, and really looked at, instead of nationally what's going on, what's happening in our community. And equity and how students perceive their treatment, whether it's because of gender, because of race, because of socioeconomic status, can also impact all of these different pieces. So in our own community, 50 to 66% of our students at the 8th through 11th grade level don't experience any ACEs, which is a great statistic to have. But 15 to 24% have experienced one ACE in their life, 7 to 15% two, 4 to 7% three, and 2 to 8% of our students, depending on what we're looking at, are experiencing 4 or more ACEs in their lives.
I'm going to start now talking a little bit about the inequities in the queer community. And when we're talking about the queer community, we're using the overarching title of the queer umbrella, which encompasses all of our alphabet community, which includes the LGBTQA+ members, along with anyone who isn't named. And because the queer community does have a lot of different letters, and because some of those letters change meaning over time, using the umbrella term queer allows us to make sure that we're addressing all members of the queer community. And we're taking a look at how the queer community experiences inequity in the schools. In Minnesota, the GLSEN 2017 National School Climate Survey does a school climate survey every year, specifically related to gender and sexuality, specifically queer items. And it demonstrated that Minnesota schools, for the most part, weren't safe for our LGBTQA+ queer students. And a lot of students in Minnesota regularly or often hear anti-queer remarks. So if you take a look at that first chart down there, that's a really high number. 85% are hearing gay being used in a negative way, like that's so gay. 72% are hearing homophobic remarks. There's negative remarks about gender expression and negative remarks about those who are trans. And so hearing those types of things can really take a hit to someone's self-esteem. This is how they identify and who they are. And because of that, it can really make people feel uncomfortable and make them feel like they're not safe in their own school. Additionally, most students in Minnesota experience victimization at school, and that takes 3 different buckets. And generally, it's going to be based off of your harassment of verbal or physical, or even like a physical assault. And when you're looking at that, you're also going to take a look at maybe religion and disability and race and ethnicity tied into those queer issues as well. And 58% of students don't report these issues to staff. And only 32% of those who do report say it even results in effective staff intervention. And so generally, students who are queer aren't reporting when they are experiencing inequities. And when they do, it oftentimes isn't dealt with in a way that helps them feel better about the situation or resolve the issues. Additionally, many queer students actually report discriminatory policies or practices at their school, and that's a little over half experience at least one form of that anti-queer discrimination during the school year. A lot of that has to do with your bathroom or locker room that aligns with your gender, or wearing clothing that's appropriate for your gender, or using your gender name, your chosen name or gender pronouns. And those are all things that help build a student's self-esteem to be able to express themselves in the gender in which they feel they most identify. Another thing that students have also experienced is expressing PDA in school. Students who are in same-sex relationships often say that they are disciplined for those PDAs, but an opposite-sex couple might not experience that discipline. And then, of course, including themes in the extracurricular activities or discussing LGBTQA+ issues in their assignments, and having that extra support from teachers and staff definitely helps students feel more comfortable with who they are when they are at school. And finally, many queer students in Minnesota don't actually have access to the school resources and support that's available. Fewer than 15% have a school with a comprehensive anti-bullying or harassment policy, and that would include a policy that has specific protections based on your orientation or your gender identity. And that definitely makes a huge difference, because if it's not specifically called out, then some of those things can get swept under the radar. Additionally, what's really surprising is that while almost 100% of students could find at least one staff member that was supportive of queer kids, fewer than 74% could identify 6 or more supportive school staff. And that's really disappointing, because every student should feel that they have a supportive school staff across the board. And then it's a little disappointing that that number goes down so much. Only 25% say that they are taught positive representations of queer people, history, or events, which includes a more inclusive curriculum. And the LGBTQA+ inclusive sex ed at school is also something that isn't necessarily supported in a way that makes queer students feel like they are being supported too. So when we take a look at Sartell and St. Stephen School District, this is kind of the breakdown that we have for 11th and 9th grade male and female students. And here you can see that while most students do identify themselves as straight, in the 9th grade, 25% of females did not identify themselves as heterosexual, 17% of males in the 9th grade, and then 12% of males in 11th grade, and 18% of females in the 11th grade. So there are people who are in this community, I mean, greater than 10%. So basically, in some cases, 1/4 of the female students are a part of the queer community. And that's a large population of students. So it's really important that our queer community is supported. One Sartell High School student actually said that having to deal with the daily microaggressions, like people saying, "This is so gay," it's like you can't be yourself at school. And when you can't be yourself at school and you don't feel supported, that's when you're going to start turning to other things to try to self-medicate in order to make yourself feel better and deal with the issues.
All of the statistics and the information on this page come from the WHO and from druguse.org. And this really talks about the difference between males and females, men and women, as we look at inequities in gender and how they choose to engage in drug use and some of those lifetime consequences from that. So men are more likely than women to use almost all types of illicit drugs, and that use is more likely to result in emergency room visits or overdose deaths for men than women. Research shows that women often use drugs differently and can have unique obstacles to effective treatment, like finding childcare in order to be away from the home to get the treatment that they need. And the lifetime prevalence rate for alcohol dependence is more than twice as high in men than women. And when we look at statistically, many of those people who will experience those issues begin their substance abuse at the middle or high school level, and it becomes a lifetime issue for them. Doctors are also more likely to diagnose things like depression in women, and women are more likely to seek help for those issues than men. And we might see that come out in school in a number of ways, depending on what schools are offering in form of program, and also depending on support at home and recognition of the issue, which if it is an issue that has been going on at home for a long time can lend itself to repetition over and over without intervention. So when we look at gender in schools and some of the pressures that students are feeling, one Sartell High School student shared that burnout is real. This student, being a woman and a person of color, said it always feels like you have to prove yourself and it's exhausting. And those pressures, that feeling like you are functioning in a place without equity all the time, lead students to make some not great choices some of the time. Another Sartell High School student says that body shaming and objectification for girls feel it regularly on a regular basis in school. Many girls who experience those kinds of feelings often make the choice to self-medicate as they're trying to deal with the pressures they feel. And so in our own school, this is a reality that many of our students are feeling and dealing with. We see impacts in other areas as well. One of those is behavior. So pulling up again the Minnesota Department of Education data that's available in the school report card and looking at discipline, we were able to see the 2018-2019 data for student disciplines in Sartell. And when we look at equity, we also want to look at reactions to behavior. And so out of the 111 discipline issues, 99 of those involved male students, while only 12 involved female students. And so when we're looking at some of the inequities happening, we have to ask ourselves, is this because male students are misbehaving, or is this because we have some issues in how we respond or how we're serving our male students? This sort of shifts into the topic Michelle's going to talk about in just a minute. But when we look at school involvement, we know that one of the best indicators for our students and whether they're going to be involved in substance abuse is how they are connected to and participate in school. And so you can see that sports teams and school clubs, we have a pretty good majority of our students who are participating, 38 to 58%. Are not participating at all in sports, but then you look at the club numbers and we have in the 70 and 80% for school clubs across sort of the board when we look at all of our different ages. But we also have students who aren't participating at all in either of those. And I'm sorry, I just said that backwards. We have a good chunk of our students who are not participating in the 70s and 80% in school-sponsored activities or sports. So I apologize, I read that wrong. But then we also have a good part of our population, and that sort of lessons as we go through how many days they're participating in school events. That access to school events is a huge part of why students are able to participate or not. And so as we start looking at the students who don't participate, sometimes things like socioeconomic status and access are part of the reason that kids are left out. For example, Sartell not having an activity bus might be a reason that students who are at risk are choosing to get involved in other activities rather than healthier ones at school.
All right, so like just even on a national level, you know, there's been quite a bit of debate on like the growing inequality like the widening of achievement gap between high income and low income families. And so socioeconomic status is a pretty big predictor for a lot of areas. So we just want to talk about that for a little bit too. You know, that students don't just, you know, it's not just participating in a sport, right? It's access to, you know, having an adult mentor, you know, who sees you in a different light than maybe it would be in a classroom. You know, and in the research that we read for this presentation, it just talked about how like having a mentor like that, or participating in these extracurricular activities, what an indicator that is for, you know, having a higher paying job after, you know, after college, or even just getting to college. So it is a pathway to success in school and adult life. You know, it cultivates some of those skills that you don't necessarily get in a classroom. You know, I made a list, so let me look at my list here. You know, like timeliness and habits and making connections, you know, and there's also been a lot of talk lately about soft skills, like working with others, leadership, self-discipline, endurance. All of those things are practiced with extracurricular activities. I already talked about the mentor thing. And then, you know, even like, you know, the wonderful participation that we have with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, like that is such a great experience for those littles, you know, to have a mentor, you know, a high school student, but then also it's such a great program for the high school students to be the mentor, you know, to have to be the role model. And so statistically, you know, there's a growing gap in extracurricular involvement, you know, so students who are struggling economically, whose families are struggling economically, like just might not have the resources. And so anything that we can do as a school to sort of like break down those barriers, to create that equity in extracurriculars too, is anything that we can do would be wonderful. You know, so of course, you know, there's help for students who are in, you know, who free and reduced lunch and that sort of thing. But like Rochelle said too, you know, are there other barriers, you know, like having a ride with the activity bus? You know, so the more we can get students involved, you know, the less likely they'll be to turn to those destructive behaviors like drug and alcohol abuse. And then could you go to the next slide? And this we thought was really interesting because, you know, we talked about ACEs. And so that this graphic kind of brings together both of those, you know, so you can see in the graphic how, you know, here's the ACEs, you know, parents serve time in jail, and then how much more likely it is if, you know, for a student to experience that ACE, if they're from like you know, they're below the federal poverty line. You know, so there's just so many factors when it comes to this. Okay.
Another issue that has to do with equity and chances of engaging in substance abuse is race. And part of that is the more likely it is that you're a person of color, the more likely you are dealing with socioeconomic difficulties and the environments that go with that. But we certainly can see among female and male high school students, you can see the overall rates in the first column of students who have ever injected drugs, misused prescription opioids, or ever used illicit drugs. And then you can see that broken down and how those rates shift when we look for students who are Black and Brown students or students who have a white background. And being a student of color often lends itself to having higher rates of substance abuse when it comes to illicit drugs than the overall population often has. As we look at our own demographics in Sartell, this is actually from 2017, so it's a little bit outdated, but MDE sometimes takes a while to update their statistics. So this was the most recent data available on MDE about how our districts, Sartell-St. Stephen's breakup of the different groups according to the census categories. And so this is not every choice, but it is what's available for students to click as they go through that process. So we have a 3% Latino population. We have a 0.3% American Indian or Native, Alaska Native population. And you've probably noticed the district did a wonderful job of hosting the American Indian Committee Input Night because of those rising numbers in that particular category. We have 2.7% Asian population, 2% Black or African American, and an 87.8% population that identifies as only white. And then a combination of races is at 4.2% as of 2017. So that just gives you an idea of what our student body is made up of, and really trying to think about what diversity means in the context of our district in particular when it comes to race or ethnicity. As we look at which students teachers are watching, this was a really unique study that was done, I think it was in Yale, I think that's what it says on the bottom, but looking at where teachers are looking, and this is not Sartell alone, but just in the study that they carried out in 2016, where's attention at? What are teachers paying attention to, and who are they paying attention to? In some ways, you can tell that perhaps some of our discipline data lends itself to where teachers are paying the most attention. Boys overwhelmingly take up a great amount of teacher eye contact, right? That's what they're looking at, paying attention to, noting those behaviors, compared to girls in general, and Black girls in this study getting the least attention or eye contact time from teachers. And so this is just an interesting way to sort of look at how teachers in this study, and they believe it to be reflective of the average classroom, are spending their time paying attention to what's happening in a classroom. This is another table that just breaks down discipline data, but this time by race. And so even though Sartell has small numbers of non-white students, or small population of people of color in our district, we have, if you look at the table, out of the numbers of incidents reported in this particular calendar year, 92 of those incidents involved white students, 5 multiracial, and 8 Black or Hispanic. And when you look at those percentages, that tells us that our students of color not necessarily are being picked on, but they might be having more difficulty meeting the cultural norms of our classroom, right? And how do we make sure that we are building in those kinds of equitable skills that we need to give students, and making sure that the reasons that we are frustrated with students aren't based on cultural difference rather than some of those behaviors. And is it because, like the last graph shows, we're looking more at male students or at a particular group of students? And so equity is one of those lenses by which we're going to be able to look at how we're interacting with students, how teachers are interacting, how our community is interacting. And the top of this table just shows the kind of interactions and behaviors up at the top. You're welcome to look at that later.
And making sure that we kind of cover all the different types of inequities that you might see in an educational system. We wanted to make sure that we focused a little bit on students, their able-bodiedness. And so, you know, youth with disabilities experience a substantially higher substance abuse risk than their non-disabled peers. You know, so students with disabilities have all that normal, like, teenage stuff that all teenagers have. So even those that are non-disabled, you know, so like peer pressure, you know, just the social media, just stress of everyday life. But then they also have those added pressures of being maybe in and out of a hospital, or having those prescribed medications, chronic illness, you know, and like missing school because they're having to deal with some of their, you know, medical issues that they have too. And so, like, if you look at that fourth bullet on this slide, students with disabilities are twice as likely as their peers to receive at least one out of school suspension. And this is jumping a little bit, it does relate. You know, but so if the student is suspended, you know, then they're not at school, you know, which can lead to that disenfranchisement. let's see. Yeah, and then also just missing out on important, day-to-day stuff in the classroom. So instructional material, the interactions, the positive interactions, with peers. And so then that can lead to like lower levels of educational success. And then, if it's year after year after year with that, that disenfranchisement, that, maybe feeling less than, that could possibly lead to, substance abuse or use. And another important point to make too is children with, who are on the who are ASD are bullied at a rate that's 3 to 4 times that of non-disabled youth. And, you just think about all the negative effects that comes, for any student to be bullied and then to, almost have more of a target on your back just because of something you can't control, is just not okay. Okay. And then this graphic was from the MEEP, the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. And so this kind of relates to what Rochelle was talking about also with, just with some of the racial disparities and struggles that our students are facing too, that we thought this was pertinent to that conversation. I also thought it was important to mention too, in this MEEP article where this is from, it talked about also that, notions of ability, have origins in structural racism. And so that's, I think, an important aspect to this also. These two graphs don't necessarily fit with, ability or disability, but we just thought there was an important point to make between these two. And so if you look at the MDE report card data from 2016-17, it says that at that time, there were no students in our district, that were reporting that they were homeless, but just, 2 school years later, the change of that and how we are reporting more instances of homelessness for our students, which, that's a whole nother risk factor when it comes to substance abuse. And so this is just, students, again, like right from their own mouths, the R word use, students hear that at school, and it feels awful to know that that's the person's viewpoint and then feel safe in a class with them. So you think back to that, students who are on the spectrum, would have to hear something like that and how that would affect their ability to make it through the day. And then also another student said students with disabilities are sometimes not included in all activities because it would have been too much work to make it inclusive. So then that goes back to that first slide, equity versus equality. What can we do to break down those barriers to help students feel safe and supported no matter where they're coming from, so then that they don't, turn to self-medication or substance abuse.
So a huge part of this is that supporting the equity audit, which is currently underway. The equity audit's goal is to help each student achieve their individual educational potential. When we're talking about educational potential, we understand that each student is going to bring in their own unique experience and culture, and each individual student is unique as well. So it's going to be important that everything that this student goes through is something that is individualized to them. When we're taking a look at the health risk behaviors, students with higher grades are less likely to drink, use marijuana, vape. Students who are able to participate in activities are often able to be more successful when they're out of school. Students who are in the queer community are more likely to feel, when they feel supported, are more likely to feel safe and successful in their school district. So these are things where it's really important that we're looking at equity across the whole spectrum of equity issues and not just focusing on one. And so the equity audit is going to do that. When we're taking a look at what is this equity audit, it's going to look at our current system structures and processes that could potentially lead to inequities within our district. And that includes socioeconomic standing, special education services, gender, religion, race, sexuality, ability, disability. So basically everything we've covered here, but also any other protected class that might come up that we didn't necessarily identify. So that's something that's really important to consider as well, is that Equity isn't a destination, equity is a journey, and we're learning new things every day about what equity is. And why does Startel need an equity audit? Well, it helps us identify these potential inequities within our district. It's going to assess what aspects of the culture and the climate promote or hinder the ability to address these identified inequalities. When we're taking a look at what's happening within our school district, what are the things that Sartell is doing well to try to alleviate some of the inequities that exist? What are some things that Sartell is doing that makes it more difficult for us to resolve these issues? And what are the potential issues that we need to work on? And those are things that are all going to be identified to help make it possible for every student in our district to be successful in their own way. The equity audit is going to give the district the resources to develop a plan. That plan will help the district define equity, review our policies and practices, determine system and delivery gaps in supporting the equity, and also identifying the equity priorities. So once we're able to identify and review, determine all of these things, there's actually going to be a plan put in place, and Equity Alliance Minnesota is going to assist with that plan. It's going to help us have an outline as to what we're going to be doing in order to help address some of these issues. And hopefully by addressing some of these issues, we'll be able to reduce the amount of students that are self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, especially those that are more likely to turn to those types of self-medicating tactics when they are experiencing inequities. And so we'll leave you here with a graphic and a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And when you take a look here at this graphic, you'll see the definitions of 4 different imbalances, or all the way to balance. So first is an inequality, where you can see that one student gets an apple, but the other doesn't. Then equality, where each student gets a ladder, but one student still can't reach the tree. Equity is having one student with a taller ladder so that each student can reach the tree. And justice is having the tree be straight so that everybody can access it without question. The last few slides of our presentation are an appendix that you can review on your own time. It has more district-specific data about Sartell and the students that are in our district. So at this point, we'll open it up for any questions if anyone has any.
I just want to say you guys did a fantastic job covering the gamut of populations and really pulling information about trends in the bigger sector as well as our immediate community. So thank you for all of that hard work and collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
I want to echo what Jen just said. I think that was a lot of hard work. But the other thing that's so apparent with that is that we have haves and have-nots in every group that we want to look at. This depends on which area you're looking at. But, and of course, the battle is always, sometimes it's considered to be competition, that if I have it, I don't want you to have it because then I'm not as well off. And that's our big challenge, that equity is not about haves and have-nots. Equity is about giving those what they need in order for them to be successful. And I thought you guys said that beautifully. So thank you for doing that. I might share this with a few folks as well. So just letting you know, once you record here, it'll probably be shared with some other folks. So thank you very much for what you did.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We were happy to do it, and it's something that we're all very passionate about. And so we were very excited when we were asked to present.
Yeah. I don't have any questions yet, but if anybody has a question, they can jump in.
I would just like to make a statement. It's interesting to me that a lot of this work is being done by people who are employed by the school, which obviously has an inherent bias in it. Most of the people in your group are teachers. They're employed by the school district. They have certain limitations about what they can and cannot say. And interestingly, I don't know how many people of color do you have in this group who are speaking for a community that is not a big part of their group. So kudos to you for doing the stuff that you do, but you have marginalized people of color outside of your group. And I don't know how you can justify just talking about the school and stuff in the school when school is just a part of the problem and you want to focus on it because that's your problem and you deal with it every day.
Thanks, Surya. I think that this particular presentation focused on the school, but we are actually working with the community as well. We've been trying to work with Mayor Fitzum to try to get the city more involved too, because we understand that you can do a lot of work in the city itself, but until the community also makes change, then there's not going to be enough change to really affect, it won't be a lasting change. So it's important that even though we're trying to help make change in the school district, that we also have change in the community as well. And that is a goal of ours too.
I thought that was not a goal of yours from what I understood from the beginning of this committee, because I was a part of this committee, and that is exactly the reason why I left this committee, because your focus was very narrow about doing equity in school and not in the local community, which did not jive with what I thought needed to be done.
I think as we've grown and we've started to really be able to see where our issues are landing, that we've started to focus more on getting outside the community as well. One of the things that we have going right now is we do have a bulletin board at the community center that we update each month with new information about equity and different focuses. So we're trying to do that. We're starting small, but we are trying to make efforts into the community part too.
And I think, and that, like Superintendent Schreiber said, it's that progress piece. I appreciated from this standpoint, from the Substance Free Coalition, the relationship of what this coalition is about, and it's educating and being able to talk about the components of substance abuse and use in our students, and how we can be more aware and have supports available for that piece, and how some of these inequities and students in our school and the populations that our students represent, and how even some of these components can affect the potential of them going to substance abuse and substance use. Prior to this, we've never had a conversation about how substance use can be related to the inequities of what is happening with our student population. A lot of it has to do with ACEs or med management pieces for disability. So this, I feel like, it has been a nice, just another avenue of us to be more informed and educated in how substance abuse and how we can continue to promote a substance-free community for our kids, and looking at another avenue of how this comes to be with our students in the school. So I also appreciate that. We have a lot of work to do. That is for sure in all of these areas, but I do appreciate how you brought it back for this group, for the cause of this coalition, which is the substance-free piece too. So I appreciate that. A lot of good information and data there.
And I think those are good points, Surya, to bring up in terms of kind of what the group looks like and sounds like. Who are they representing, and which kind of leads to then that future work where because of it being a volunteer group, I mean, just how do you morph that and move that across, different areas of the community, different topics covered, and just all the action that needs to take place. And so I think that's important and vital to kind of think about and improve.
But how can you have this committee when you don't have people of color in it? And you say that it's hard to get them because you've been marginalizing them from the beginning. So you're talking about all your white privilege here and making all these big plans, and you really don't know what you're talking about.
Surya, I would ask that you not make assumptions about people from the way they present. My children look white, but they are half Latino, and they are half white. And I know that many of the families who are a part of this group share a similar background, and their children have a similar experience. Equity is not just about color. Equity is about background. It's about culture. It's about ability. It's about need to access special education. It's much larger than something that's visible. And I think that that was something that was made very clear as we went through this discussion. It's about sexuality and gender, and all of those different pieces impact our students and our children. And I think anyone is welcome at any of the meetings that IFA puts on. And I think that the school district has an educational equity committee that they are working towards to carry out the equity audit. And so I also think it's important we check all of our preconceived ideas about who is focusing on equity and what their reasons are, and that we don't assume it just is about physical characteristics that present themselves. And certainly people of color are an important piece of that. My ex-husband of 10 years, who is an immigrant to this country, who's a man of color, has had some very unique experiences in this community. My children, who look like me, but have a very Mexican-centered identity, have had experiences and heard things that are uncomfortable for them. And so I think it's important for all of us to consider the many variables involved in equity, the definition that the Equity Alliance is using to look at the equity audit, and certainly value all of the voices that are a part of that conversation. I don't think that the organization would prevent anyone from coming and sharing their opinion. And certainly while education was the beginning of this work, it's not where that work has ended.
I am not by any way saying that color or anything by itself is an issue for equity. I'm just saying that focusing just in terms of the school and making that a priority because that is your area of work, and focusing on that is not just the whole aspect of speaking about equity.
And I think that we would all agree with that. It just so happens that for this presentation and for this work, we were asked to focus on the school and on equity within the school. And so for the purposes of this presentation, that is what this group focused on. And certainly the conversations that need to be had around equity are much larger. And there are lots of organizations and partner groups who are having that conversation. And we certainly are in support of that.
So if anybody would want to know more about your group and being a part of it or getting involved or wanting to know more, how would they go about reaching out?
We do have a Facebook page, Envisioned Equity for All on Facebook. And we also have a website, www.envisionedequityforall.com. And that has a link to our Facebook as well. And we have meetings the first Monday of the month at 7 p.m. And right now we're doing them via Zoom. And those will be advertised on Facebook with the link as well. Or I'm sorry, not Zoom, Google Meet. And we do that on Facebook.
All right.
Yes.
Anything else? Jen, crew, questions?
No, I would say thanks again. And, you know, it brings up more to think about and more to do. So thank you very much for the time and the words and the future bridging.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then next month is our last Substance Free Coalition meeting for the year. And it's kind of a segue of one of the components that you talked about tonight, but we have Megan Siemens, who is coming to speak. She is a chapter lead for the queer community for the employee that she works for. She is also a parent of a student, middle school student who identifies as transgender. So she's going to be talking about her experience with that, and then just essentially supports and things that we can do as parents and, adult figures in these students' lives if they are working through some of these transitions or just kind of confused or trying to work through some of their gender identity. So.
Nice.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you guys. You did a lot of work for that. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
All right, thank you.